Hi, I'm Maya Chen, and the day I discovered my ex-boyfriend was celebrating his promotion with another woman at the restaurant where he first told me he loved me, I realized he had no idea who really owned the company that just made him their new regional director. 3 months of radio silence, countless nights wondering what I did wrong, and watching him parade his upgrade on social media while I built the business that would eventually crush him. By the time I was done, he wasn't just fired. He was blacklisted from the entire industry, and the woman he left me for? Well, let's just say she learned some very uncomfortable truths about her perfect new boyfriend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain was hitting my office window in sheets that Thursday evening in October, each drop catching the city lights of downtown Portland like tiny prisms. I should have been celebrating. Evergreen Digital Solutions had just landed the Morrison Industries contract, a $2.8 million deal that would put us on the map as one of the premier digital marketing firms on the West Coast. Instead, I was staring at my phone screen, scrolling through Instagram posts that felt like tiny knives to my chest. There he was again. Ryan Thompson, my ex-boyfriend of 2 years, the man who had vanished from my life without explanation 4 months ago, now posting pictures with her. Jessica Manning, the marketing director from Summit Creative, our biggest competitor. They were at Cascade Prime, the upscale steakhouse downtown where Ryan had first whispered, "I love you," into my ear over expensive wine and candlelight 18 months ago. Now he was feeding her dessert with the same fork, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders, her perfectly manicured hand resting on his chest like she owned him. The caption read, "Celebrating my promotion to regional director with my beautiful girl. Sometimes life just falls into place when you're with the right person." My stomach twisted. Regional director. At my own company. The company I had co-founded 3 years ago with Pat Rodriguez, where I held a 25% silent partnership that Ryan never knew existed. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. I set my phone face down on my mahogany desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Willamette River. The Pearl District was alive below me, people hurrying through the rain with their collars turned up, headlights creating rivers of light on the wet asphalt. From the 32nd floor, they all looked so small, so insignificant. That's exactly how I felt right now, even though I was sitting in an office that cost more per month than most people's salaries. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass. At 28, I was told I had the kind of face that photographed well, angular cheekbones inherited from my Chinese mother, warm brown eyes from my Irish father, and shoulder-length black hair that I usually kept in a neat bob for professional meetings. Tonight, it was messier than usual, evidence of the stress I'd been running my fingers through it all day. I was wearing my favorite charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, the kind of outfit that commanded respect in boardrooms but apparently meant nothing when it came to keeping the man I thought I'd marry. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the complete silence that preceded it. Ryan hadn't given me a fight, hadn't given me closure, hadn't even given me the courtesy of a text message. One day we were planning a weekend trip to Cannon Beach, talking about moving in together, sharing morning coffee and evening wine on my apartment balcony. The next day he simply stopped responding to my messages, stopped answering my calls, stopped existing in my world, as if our 2 years together had been nothing more than a bad dream he'd finally woken up from. I had spent weeks replaying every conversation, every moment, every touch, trying to find the crack where it all went wrong. Had I been too focused on work? Had I not been affectionate enough? Had I somehow failed to be the woman he needed? The questions ate at me like acid, dissolving my confidence from the inside out until I barely recognized myself. The buzz of my desk phone pulled me from the window. Kim Foster, my assistant and one of the few people who knew about my ownership stake in Evergreen, was calling from her desk just outside my office. "Maya, Pat wants to see you in the conference room. She says it's about the Morrison contract details." "I'll be right there," I replied, smoothing my blazer and checking my reflection once more in the dark window. Patricia Rodriguez was my business partner, mentor, and the closest thing I had to a mother figure since my own parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago. She was the one who had encouraged me to use my inheritance to invest in the digital marketing space, who had taught me that sometimes the most powerful position in a room was the one nobody knew you held. The conference room was on the same floor, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city and the Cascade Mountains in the distance. Pat was already there, her silver hair pulled back in its signature chignon, her red reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents spread across the polished conference table. At 62, she had the kind of presence that made CEOs twice her size listen when she spoke. She'd built 3 successful companies before Evergreen, and her Rolodex was legendary in Portland business circles. "Maya, good, you're here. We need to talk about staffing for the Morrison project." She looked up from the papers, her sharp green eyes studying my face with the intensity of someone who had been reading people successfully for 4 decades. "You look tired. When was the last time you slept?" I settled into the chair across from her, grateful for the familiar ritual of work talk. "I'm fine, Pat, just excited about Morrison. This contract changes everything for us." "It does indeed. Which is why I'm concerned about our current sales team structure." She slid a folder across the table to me. "I've been reviewing performance metrics for the past quarter, and while Ryan Thompson's individual numbers look good on paper, I'm seeing some patterns that worry me." My heart skipped, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of patterns?" "Client retention in his accounts is lower than industry standard. We're getting the initial contracts, but renewal rates are poor. I've also noticed he's been requesting unusually detailed information about our proprietary processes and client strategies." Pat removed her glasses and fixed me with that look I'd come to know meant she was about to drop a bomb. "Maya, I think we may have a corporate espionage situation on our hands." The words hit me like ice water. Corporate espionage. The phrase sounded dramatic, like something from a thriller movie, but in the cutthroat world of digital marketing, it was a very real threat. Companies lived and died by their client relationships and proprietary strategies. If someone was feeding information to competitors, "You think Ryan is selling information?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos in my chest. "I think Ryan Thompson has been systematically documenting our processes, client communication strategies, and pricing models for months. What I don't know is why, or who he's sharing it with." Pat leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. "I also find it interesting that Summit Creative has been underbidding us on 3 major contracts this quarter, with proposals that mirror our strategies almost exactly." Summit Creative, Jessica's company. The pieces began clicking together in my mind like tumblers in a lock. Ryan had access to our client files, our strategy documents, our pricing models. He'd been present at strategy meetings, had copies of our proposals, knew our competitive advantages inside and out. And now he was dating the marketing director of our biggest competitor. "What do you want to do?" I asked, though my mind was already racing ahead to possibilities I hadn't dared consider before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Want you to conduct a quiet internal investigation. Use your technical background to trace document access, email patterns, anything that might give us proof. If Ryan Thompson is betraying this company, I want him gone, and I want it to be airtight so he can't claim wrongful termination. Pat's expression softened slightly. "I know this is personal for you, Maya. I know you two had a relationship. If you're not comfortable handling this." "I can handle it," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "My personal feelings won't interfere with protecting the company." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. This wasn't just about protecting Evergreen Digital Solutions anymore. This was about the man who had discarded me like yesterday's coffee grounds, while potentially stealing from the company I'd helped build. The man who was now celebrating a promotion he'd earned through betrayal, with a woman who might very well be his co-conspirator. Pat nodded, apparently satisfied with my response. "Good. Keep this between us for now. I don't want to alert anyone until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Can you have a preliminary report by early next week?" "Absolutely." I gathered the folder and stood to leave, my mind already cataloging the digital trails I would need to follow. Every email, every document access, every client communication would tell a story. I just had to be smart enough to read it. As I walked back to my office, I passed the sales department where Ryan's desk sat empty for the evening. His workstation was neat, organized, betraying nothing of the potential betrayal lurking beneath its surface. His coffee mug still sat there, the one I'd given him last Christmas with "World's Best Boyfriend" printed on the side in cheerful red letters. I wondered if he'd thrown away the matching mug I'd kept at my apartment, or if Jessica used it now for her morning latte. Back in my office, I pulled up the company's internal server system and began the process of tracing document access logs. As one of the founding partners, I had administrative access to everything: emails, file sharing, client communications, even security camera footage. The digital breadcrumbs of Ryan's activities over the past 6 months began to paint a picture that made my stomach churn. There it was, clear as daylight. Ryan had been accessing client files outside of his direct accounts, downloading strategy documents he had no business reading, and forwarding copies to a personal email address. The frequency had increased dramatically over the past 3 months, right around the time he'd started dating Jessica, right around the time he'd ghosted me. But the most damning evidence was in his email history. I found message after message sent to an encrypted account, with subject lines like Q3 strategy update and Morrison proposal final draft. The timestamps showed these emails were being sent late at night and on weekends, when the office was empty and no one would notice his extra activity. My hands trembled slightly as I took screenshots of everything, building a digital dossier that would end Ryan's career not just at Evergreen, but anywhere in the Portland tech scene. Pat's network was vast, and her word carried weight. If she put out the word that Ryan Thompson was a corporate spy, he'd be lucky to find work designing websites for small nonprofits. As I worked, my phone buzzed with another Instagram notification. Ryan had posted a story. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a video of him and Jessica at what looked like a house party, probably one of those networking events that peppered Portland's tech scene. She was laughing at something he'd said, her head thrown back in delight, her hand resting on his arm with casual intimacy. The caption read, "When you find someone who gets your ambition. The phrase felt like a slap. I had supported his ambition for 2 years. I had celebrated his successes, consoled him through his failures, and encouraged him to reach higher. I had been his biggest cheerleader, his sounding board, his safe harbor. And apparently, none of that had been enough. But Jessica Manning, marketing director at Summit Creative, got his ambition. Jessica Manning, who was receiving stolen proprietary information from my company through her new boyfriend. Jessica Manning, who had no idea she was sleeping with a man who was about to lose everything. I leaned back in my leather chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. The evidence was damning, but it was also incomplete. If I was going to destroy Ryan Thompson, and I was beginning to realize that's exactly what I wanted to do, I needed more than just proof of corporate espionage. I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal, both professional and personal. I needed to know if Jessica had recruited him or if he'd approached her. I needed to know how long they'd been planning this, and whether their relationship was genuine or simply a convenient cover for corporate theft. Most importantly, I needed to know if she knew who I really was. Because if Jessica Manning thought she'd stolen my boyfriend and my business secrets, she was about to learn that she'd picked a fight with the wrong woman. I wasn't just Maya Chen, the heartbroken ex-girlfriend. I was Maya Chen, co-founder and silent partner of Evergreen Digital Solutions. I was Maya Chen, who held Ryan Thompson's career in her hands, and Maya Chen was done being invisible. I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. If Pat wanted a preliminary report by early next week, she was going to get the most comprehensive corporate espionage investigation in Portland business history. Every email, every file access, every client meeting would be documented with forensic precision. By the time I was finished, Ryan Thompson wouldn't just be fired, he'd be destroyed. But first, I needed to understand my enemy. I needed to know everything about Jessica Manning, from her professional background to her personal vulnerabilities. If she was complicit in this betrayal, she deserved whatever consequences followed. If she was an unwitting pawn in Ryan's game, well, She was about to get a very educational wake-up call about the man she thought she knew. I pulled up Jessica's LinkedIn profile and began to read. Marketing director at Summit Creative for 2 years, MBA from University of Oregon, previously worked at a boutique agency in Seattle. Her professional photos showed a polished woman with honey blonde hair and the kind of smile that probably worked well in client meetings. Her recent posts were all about digital marketing trends and thought leadership pieces about brand strategy. There was nothing obviously predatory about her online presence, nothing that screamed corporate spy or boyfriend-stealing manipulator. In fact, she seemed normal, professional. The kind of woman who probably thought she'd simply found a good man who shared her professional interests. The realization that Jessica might be innocent should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel worse. Because if she wasn't the villain in this story, then Ryan's betrayal was even more calculating than I'd imagined. He hadn't just left me for another woman. He'd left me for a strategic advantage, using romance as a weapon in corporate warfare. My phone rang, startling me from my research. The caller ID showed my best friend Marcus Reed's name. Marcus was a private investigator who'd helped me with some background checks when I was vetting potential business partners for Evergreen. He was also one of the few people who knew the full story of Ryan's disappearance from my life. "Hey Maya, you still at the office? It's almost 9. I glanced at my computer clock, surprised to see that it was indeed nearly 9 p.m. The time had disappeared while I'd been building my case against Ryan. "Yeah, working on a project, what's up? Actually, I was calling because I saw something today that I thought you should know about. I was doing surveillance on a cheating spouse case, and I happened to see your ex at a coffee shop downtown with that blonde he's been posting about." My stomach tightened. "Okay. Maya, they weren't just having coffee. They had laptops out, documents spread across the table, and they were clearly conducting some kind of business meeting. The blonde had what looked like client files, and your ex was taking notes in a legal pad. It looked like they were strategizing about something specific." The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a coordinated attack on my company, orchestrated by my ex-boyfriend and the woman he'd replaced me with. They weren't just dating. They were business partners in the systematic destruction of Evergreen Digital Solutions. "Marcus," I said quietly, "how would you like to help me conduct the most satisfying investigation of your career?" There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to know everything about Jessica Manning and Ryan Thompson. Everything. Professional history, financial records, communication patterns, who they meet with, where they go, what they eat for breakfast. I want to map their entire lives so completely that I know things about them they've forgotten themselves. That's going to take some time and cost some money. I have both." And I did. My inheritance from my parents, combined with my stake in Evergreen's growing success, had left me financially comfortable enough to fund whatever investigation was necessary. "How long do you need?" "Give me a week for the deep dive." "But Maya," his tone grew serious, "what's your end game here? Because once we start pulling these threads, there's no putting them back." I looked out at the Portland skyline, at the lights of the city where I'd built my life and my business, where I'd fallen in love and had my heart systematically destroyed. Ryan Thompson thought he could ghost me, steal from my company, and parade his new relationship like a victory lap. Jessica Manning thought she could poach clients and strategies without consequences. They were both about to learn that Maya Chen didn't just disappear quietly into the night. "My endgame," I said, surprising myself with the calm certainty in my voice, "is making sure they both get exactly what they deserve." Marcus called me back exactly 7 days later at 6:30 in the morning. I was already awake, sitting on my apartment balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the Willamette River gold. Sleep had become elusive since I'd started this investigation, my mind churning through possibilities and scenarios like a computer processing code. "Maya, you're going to want to sit down for this," Marcus said without preamble. His voice carried that particular weight that meant he'd uncovered something significant. "I'm already sitting. What did you find?" Jessica Manning isn't just the marketing director at Summit Creative. She's also the daughter of Richard Manning, the venture capitalist who's been trying to buy out small digital marketing firms across the Pacific Northwest for the past 3 years. And get this, Summit Creative isn't independently owned. It's a subsidiary of Manning Enterprises. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Richard Manning was a name whispered in Portland business circles, with a mixture of respect and fear. He was known for his aggressive acquisition strategies, swooping in on struggling companies and absorbing them into his empire. The fact that Summit Creative was his operation explained their seemingly unlimited resources and their ability to consistently underbid established firms. So Jessica is corporate royalty, I said, processing the implications. But that still doesn't explain Ryan's involvement. Oh, it gets better. I traced Ryan's financial records, going back 18 months. He's been receiving monthly payments of $5,000 from a shell company called Northwest Consulting Solutions. Want to guess who owns Northwest Consulting Solutions? My blood ran cold. Manning Enterprises. Bingo. Ryan Thompson has been on Manning's payroll since March of last year, which means he was working for your competitor while dating you, while having access to all your company's proprietary information. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. March of last year was when Ryan and I had gotten serious, when he had started staying over at my apartment regularly, when I'd begun sharing more details about my work. I'd thought I was falling in love. He'd been conducting industrial espionage. There's more, Marcus continued. I managed to get access to some of Jessica's personal communications through a contact at her gym. She's been texting someone she calls Daddy about a project called Operation Evergreen. The messages go back 4 months. 4 months. Exactly when Ryan had ghosted me. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a coordinated business strategy designed to destroy my company from the inside out. What kind of messages? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Direct quotes. Phase 1 complete. Asset has been isolated and is emotionally compromised. Target company showing signs of internal stress. Ready for acquisition approach. Asset continues to provide valuable intelligence. Recommend bonus payment. Marcus paused. Maya, they've been planning this for months. Ryan wasn't your boyfriend. He was their inside man. I set my coffee cup down with hands that trembled slightly. The man I'd loved, the man I'd planned a future with, had been systematically destroying me on behalf of a competitor who wanted to acquire my company. Every intimate moment, every shared secret, every vulnerable conversation had been weaponized against me. Send me everything, I said quietly. Every document, every photo, every financial record, I want it all. Already done. Check your secure email. But Maya, what are you planning to do with this information? I stood up and walked to the edge of my balcony, looking out over the city that had become a battlefield I hadn't even known I was fighting in. I'm going to destroy them all. Systematically, completely, and with the same level of planning they used against me. After Marcus hung up, I spent the morning reviewing the evidence he'd compiled. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Ryan had been photographing documents at my apartment, copying files from my laptop when I was in the shower, even recording conversations we'd had about Evergreen's business strategies. He'd turned our relationship into a surveillance operation, mining our intimacy for corporate intelligence. But the most damning evidence was in Jessica's communications with her father. The messages revealed a detailed plan to destabilize Evergreen Digital Solutions, isolate key personnel, and position Manning Enterprises for a hostile takeover. Ryan's role was to provide inside information and create internal chaos by abandoning key relationships and projects at critical moments. They'd played me perfectly. The loving boyfriend who encouraged me to share my work problems, who offered to help with business challenges, who seemed so invested in my success. All of it had been theater, performed for an audience of one. Me, the naive Mark who'd fallen for the performance. My phone buzzed with a text from Kim, my assistant. Pat wants to see you in her office as soon as you get in. Says it's urgent. I arrived at the office an hour later to find Pat pacing behind her desk, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. She looked up when I entered, her green eyes flashing with anger. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Morrison Industries called this morning. They're canceling their contract." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "They claim they've received a more competitive proposal from Summit Creative. that includes proprietary strategies they believe we shared with competitors. Pat's voice was ice cold. They're accusing us of breach of confidentiality. The room spun slightly as the implications hit me. Not only had Ryan and Jessica used our stolen strategies to undercut us, they'd also framed us for the theft. It was brilliant and ruthless. They got the contract and damaged our reputation simultaneously. There's more, Pat continued. I received a call from 3 other clients this morning. They're all questioning our confidentiality practices. Someone has been systematically undermining our credibility across our entire client base. I sank into the chair across from her desk. Pat, I need to tell you something about Ryan Thompson. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything Marcus had discovered. The secret payments, the Manning connection, the coordinated espionage operation, Jessica's role as the venture capitalist's daughter. Pat listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number. Samuel, it's Pat Rodriguez. I need you in my office immediately for a termination proceeding. She hung up and looked at me. Samuel Brooks from HR will handle the formal firing. But Maya, this goes far beyond termination. This is criminal conspiracy, corporate espionage, and potentially racketeering under federal law. I want to handle this carefully, I said. If we move too quickly, they might destroy evidence or disappear. I want to make sure we have everything we need to not only stop them, but to press criminal charges. Pat nodded slowly. What do you propose? Give me 48 hours. I want to set a trap that catches them in the act and gets us evidence that will hold up in court. Once we have them dead to rights, we can destroy them publicly and legally. And what about Ryan? Do we fire him now? I considered this carefully. No. If we fire him now, he'll know we're onto them and they'll cover their tracks. Better to let him think he's safe while we gather the final pieces of evidence. Samuel Brooks arrived within minutes, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and the careful demeanor of someone who'd handled his share of corporate crises. After Pat briefed him on the situation, he whistled low. This is the most comprehensive corporate espionage case I've seen in 20 years, he said. We're talking about federal crimes here. The FBI's white-collar crime division would be very interested in this. Let's focus on getting airtight evidence first, I said. I have a plan, but I need everyone to act normal for the next 2 days. Can you do that? Both Pat and Samuel nodded, though I could see the strain in their faces. The company we'd built was under attack, and the natural instinct was to fight back immediately. But I'd learned something important over the past week. Patience and planning were more powerful than anger and impulse. I spent the rest of the morning setting my trap. First, I created a fake strategic document outlining Evergreen's supposed expansion into the Seattle market, complete with fabricated client targets and proprietary methodologies. The document was designed to be irresistible to Summit Creative, a perfect opportunity to expand their operation and steal our competitive advantages. Then I scheduled a fake meeting with our accounting department to discuss the Seattle expansion budget, making sure to mention it within earshot of Ryan's desk. I also sent myself an email with the subject line Seattle Expansion Confidential Strategy and saved the fake document to our shared server, where Ryan had access. The bait was set. Now I had to wait for them to take it. I didn't have to wait long. By 3 p.m., Ryan had accessed the fake document twice and forwarded it to his personal email account. By 5 p.m., Jessica Manning had called a meeting with Summit Creative's Seattle development team. By 6 p.m., Richard Manning himself had scheduled a conference call with his acquisition team for the following morning. Marcus, who'd been monitoring their communications through methods I didn't ask about, sent me real-time updates on their activities. They were moving fast, excited by the prospect of beating Evergreen to the Seattle market using our own strategies. But the fake document contained a crucial element they hadn't noticed, a hidden watermark that would identify any proposal derived from our stolen information. When Summit Creative inevitably submitted their Seattle expansion proposal to the same fictional clients I'd mentioned, the watermark would prove the theft conclusively. That evening, I worked late at the office, ostensibly reviewing quarterly reports but actually monitoring the digital trail Ryan was leaving as he stole and transmitted our fake intelligence. Every access, every download, Every forwarded email was being logged and documented with forensic precision. Around 8 p.m., Ryan stopped by my office. It was the first time we'd been alone together since he'd ghosted me 4 months ago, and seeing him standing in my doorway sent a complex mix of emotions through me: anger, hurt, and now, knowing what I knew, a kind of cold satisfaction. "Hey, Maya," he said, leaning against the doorframe with that casual confidence that had once made my heart skip. "Working late again? Morrison contract follow-up." I lied smoothly. "You know how it is." He stepped into my office uninvited, and I noticed his eyes scanning my desk, probably looking for information he could use. "I heard Morrison canceled. That's rough." The audacity of his sympathy, knowing he'd orchestrated the cancellation, was breathtaking. "We'll recover. We always do." "Listen, Maya, I know things ended weird between us," he said, and I had to admire his acting ability. He actually looked genuinely concerned. "I hope there's no hard feelings. You're a great person, and I want you to be successful." I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how I'd ever thought I loved this man. The Ryan Thompson standing in my office wasn't the person I'd fallen for. He was a corporate spy, a manipulator, a man who'd weaponized intimacy for profit. The realization should have hurt more than it did. "No hard feelings," I said with a smile that felt genuine because it was. I truly felt nothing for him anymore except a professional interest in his destruction. "I hope you get everything you deserve, Ryan." He smiled back, apparently missing the double meaning in my words. "Thanks, Maya. That means a lot." After he left, I sat in my office for another hour, finalizing the details of my counterattack. Tomorrow, Summit Creative would submit their Seattle expansion proposal, complete with our stolen strategies and the hidden watermark that would expose their theft. Richard Manning would discover that his daughter and her boyfriend had not only committed federal crimes, but had also walked directly into a trap set by the woman they'd tried to destroy. But I had one more card to play, one final element that would ensure their destruction was complete and public. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Janet Morrison, the CEO of Morrison Industries, who'd canceled our contract that morning. "Dear Janet," I typed, "I believe you may have been the victim of corporate espionage and fraud. I'd like to schedule a meeting to share some information that I think you'll find very interesting." By the time I finished the email, it was nearly midnight. I looked out at the Portland skyline, at the city lights reflecting off the river, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of knowing that justice was coming. Ryan Thompson and Jessica Manning had spent months planning my destruction. They'd stolen my company's secrets, manipulated my emotions, and tried to frame us for their crimes. They thought they were so clever, so sophisticated in their corporate warfare. Tomorrow, they were going to learn that Maya Chen was a much more dangerous enemy than they'd ever imagined. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, already mentally rehearsing the presentation I would give to Morrison Industries. The presentation that would not only clear Evergreen's name but would expose Summit Creative's entire operation to the light of day. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, I allowed myself a small smile. Ryan had been right about one thing. I was going to be very successful, just not in the way he'd intended. The next morning, I arrived at Morrison Industries headquarters downtown at exactly 9 a.m. Janet Morrison was a formidable woman in her 50s, who'd built her manufacturing company from a small family business into a regional powerhouse. She had the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter when she entered a room, and I knew she didn't tolerate incompetence or deception. "Miss Chen," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. "I'll admit I'm curious about this meeting. Your email was intriguingly vague. Thank you for seeing me on short notice," I replied, settling into the chair across from her massive oak desk. "I believe you canceled your contract with Evergreen Digital Solutions yesterday due to concerns about confidentiality breaches." Her expression hardened. "That's correct. We received information suggesting that your company had shared our proprietary strategies with competitors. That's completely unacceptable." "I agree completely," I said, opening my laptop, "which is why I wanted to show you exactly how that information was stolen, who stole it, and how they've been using it to manipulate you and other clients." For the next 30 minutes, I walked Janet through the evidence Marcus had compiled. The financial records showing Ryan's payments from Manning Enterprises, the The communication logs revealing the coordinated espionage operation, the timeline proving that Ryan had been stealing information while pretending to work for Evergreen. Janet's face grew darker with each revelation. When I showed her Jessica's text messages about Operation Evergreen and the plan to isolate and acquire our company, she actually swore under her breath. So Summit Creative's proposal, she said slowly, was based entirely on stolen information from your company. Not just stolen, I corrected. The proposal they submitted to you yesterday contains strategies and methodologies that were developed specifically for your account by Evergreen. They literally copied our work and presented it as their own innovation. I pulled up the watermarked document on my laptop. This is a proprietary strategy document we created for your account. And this, I opened Summit Creative's proposal, is their submission to you yesterday. Note the identical language, the same strategic framework, even the same formatting quirks. Janet leaned forward, studying both documents. This is corporate theft on a massive scale. It gets worse, I continued. Summit Creative isn't an independent agency. It's owned by Manning Enterprises, a venture capital firm that specializes in hostile takeovers of small businesses. They've been using stolen intelligence to undercut competitors and then acquiring the companies they've weakened. I could see the fury building in Janet's eyes. Morrison Industries had built its reputation on ethical business practices and supporting local companies. The idea that they'd been manipulated into canceling a contract with a local firm in favor of a predatory corporation would be personally offensive to her. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "I want you to help me expose them," I said. Tomorrow, Summit Creative is submitting a proposal for a fabricated Seattle expansion project. The proposal will contain stolen strategies with hidden watermarks that prove the theft. If you were to express interest in expanding your operations to Seattle, a slow smile spread across Janet's face. "You want me to set them up. I want you to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. Publicly, thoroughly, and in a way that will serve as a warning to every other predatory corporation thinking about targeting local businesses." Janet picked up her phone. "Cancel my 10 o'clock. And get me Richard Manning on the line. I think it's time Manning Enterprises learned what happens when they mess with Portland businesses." As I left Morrison Industries an hour later, I felt the satisfaction of pieces clicking into place. Janet Morrison was now a co-conspirator in exposing Summit Creative's operation, and her reputation and connections would ensure that the story reached every important business leader in the Pacific Northwest. But there was still one more element to put in place, the element that would ensure Ryan and Jessica's destruction was personal as well as professional. I drove to Blue Mountain Roasters, the coffee shop where Ryan and Jessica had been conducting their business meetings. I ordered a latte and settled into a corner table with a clear view of the entrance, then sent Jessica a message from a fake social media account. "Hi Jessica. I'm a freelance journalist working on a story about successful women in Portland's tech scene. I'd love to interview you about your work at Summit Creative and your thoughts on women breaking barriers in digital marketing. Are you available for coffee this afternoon?" The response came within minutes. "I'd be honored. I can meet at Blue Mountain Roasters at 2 p.m. if that works for you." Perfect. I spent the next few hours putting the finishing touches on my plan, coordinating with Marcus to ensure everything was documented and timed precisely. By the time Jessica Manning walked into Blue Mountain Roasters at exactly 2 p.m., I was ready for the final act of this corporate drama. She was prettier in person than in her social media photos, with the kind of polished confidence that came from growing up wealthy and connected. She looked around the coffee shop with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never had to worry about money or consequences. I stood up and waved her over. "Jessica? I'm Sarah Williams from Northwest Business Weekly." She shook my hand with a bright smile. "So nice to meet you, Sarah. I have to say I'm excited about this interview. It's not often that women in marketing get recognized for their strategic thinking." We settled into a quiet corner booth, and I pulled out a tablet and a small recording device. "Do you mind if I record our conversation? It helps me ensure accuracy in my quotes." "Of course not. I want to make sure I represent our industry well." I started with softball questions about her background and her role at Summit Creative, watching her relax and open up. She was articulate and confident, clearly proud of her professional accomplishments. Under different circumstances, I might have actually liked her. "Tell me about some of your recent successes," I said, leaning forward with apparent interest. "I understand Summit Creative has been winning some major contracts lately." "We have," she said, her eyes lighting up. "We just landed the Morrison Industries account, which was a huge win. We've also been successful in anticipating market trends and staying ahead of our competitors." "How do you stay ahead of competitors?" "That's always a challenge in digital marketing." "Well," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "it helps to have inside knowledge of what your competitors are planning. The industry is smaller than people think, and if you know the right people—" I nodded encouragingly. "That makes sense. Networking is so important." "Exactly. My boyfriend actually works for one of our competitors, so we get insights into their strategies and client relationships. It's not unethical," she added quickly. "It's just smart business." The recording device captured every word. "That's fascinating. And you've been able to use those insights to win contracts?" "Oh yes, we've been able to create proposals that directly address client concerns that our competitors hadn't even considered. It's given us a significant competitive advantage." I leaned back, studying her face. There was no guilt there, no recognition that what she was describing was corporate espionage. She genuinely believed that stealing her boyfriend's company secrets was just clever networking. "Jessica," I said quietly, "what would you say if I told you that your boyfriend has been paid by your father's company to spy on his employer for over a year?" The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" "My name is Maya Chen. I'm the co-founder and silent partner of Evergreen Digital Solutions. I'm also Ryan Thompson's ex-girlfriend, the woman he was with while he was stealing my company's secrets for your family's business." Jessica stared at me in shock, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The confident marketing director had disappeared, replaced by a young woman who was beginning to realize she'd been played. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Ryan would have told me if he knew the owner of Evergreen. He would have told me about you." "Would he?" I asked gently. "Or would he have kept that information to himself because it was more valuable as leverage?" "Tell me, Jessica, when did your father first suggest that you should date Ryan?" The question hit her like a physical blow. I could see the memories clicking into place. Her father's casual mention of Ryan Thompson, the convenient introduction at a networking event, the way her family had immediately embraced her new boyfriend. "Oh God," she breathed. "Oh God, what have I done?" "You've helped your father's company commit federal crimes," I said matter-of-factly. "Corporate espionage, wire fraud, potentially racketeering. But more importantly, you've been manipulated by two men who used your emotions and your professional ambitions to turn you into an accomplice." Jessica's hands shook as she reached for her purse. "I need to call my lawyer. I need to call my father." "I wouldn't," I said calmly. "Your father is going to be facing criminal charges, and any lawyer he provides will be working to protect Manning Enterprises, not you. If you want my advice, you should contact the FBI's white-collar crime division and offer to cooperate in exchange for immunity." She stared at me with the expression of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. "Why are you telling me this? Why are you helping me?" "Because unlike your father and my ex-boyfriend, I don't enjoy destroying innocent people. You were used, Jessica. You don't have to go down with them." I stood up, leaving my business card on the table. "If you decide you want to do the right thing, call me. But decide quickly. The FBI will be a lot less sympathetic once the story goes public tomorrow." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I could hear Jessica crying quietly behind me. It should have felt like victory, but mostly it just felt like justice. She would have a choice now that her father and Ryan had never given me, the chance to choose truth over loyalty, integrity over family expectations. The next morning, I sat in Pat's office with Samuel Brooks, Marcus Reed, and a stern-faced woman named Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's white-collar crime division. The conference table was covered with documents, photographs, and digital evidence that painted a comprehensive picture of Manning Enterprises' criminal operation. This is one of the most thorough corporate espionage cases I've ever seen, Agent Torres said, reviewing the evidence for the third time. The financial records alone are enough for multiple felony charges. Add in the communications intercepts and the documented theft of proprietary information, and we're looking at serious federal prison time for everyone involved. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jessica Manning. "I want to help. Can we meet?" I showed the message to Agent Torres, who nodded approvingly. A cooperating witness from inside their organization would make this case airtight. "Can you arrange a meeting?" Within 2 hours, Jessica was sitting in our conference room, her father's high-powered attorney conspicuously absent. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight, her polished confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who discovered their entire life was built on lies. "I brought everything," she said quietly, sliding a laptop bag across the table to Agent Torres. "My personal communications with my father, financial records, strategy documents, everything I could find." Agent Torres opened the laptop and began scrolling through the files. After a few minutes, she looked up with satisfaction. "Ms. Manning, this evidence is going to be very helpful in our investigation. In exchange for your cooperation, the Bureau is prepared to offer you immunity from prosecution." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I want you to know that I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was just sharing industry insights with my boyfriend. I had no idea that he was being paid to steal information, and I had no idea that you," she looked at me, "were the owner of the company we were targeting." "What changed your mind?" I asked. "Why are you here instead of standing by your family?" "Because last night I called Ryan to confront him about what you'd told me, and do you know what he said?" She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "He said it didn't matter what I knew because I was just as guilty as he was, and if I tried to back out now, he'd make sure I went to prison with him." The room was silent for a moment. Even Agent Torres looked disgusted by Ryan's callousness. "So much for true love," Marcus muttered under his breath. Jessica's cooperation provided the final pieces of evidence needed to complete the case against Manning Enterprises. By the end of the week, federal agents had executed search warrants on Summit Creative's offices, Manning Enterprises headquarters, and Ryan Thompson's apartment. The story broke in the Portland Business Journal with the headline, "Local VC Firm Charged in Corporate Espionage Scandal." Ryan was arrested at his desk on a Thursday morning, led away in handcuffs while his colleagues watched in shock. Richard Manning was arrested the same day at his country club, his reputation and business empire crumbling around him in real time. But the most satisfying moment came when Morrison Industries held a press conference to announce they were not only reinstating their contract with Evergreen Digital Solutions, but doubling it in recognition of our integrity and professionalism. Janet Morrison stood at the podium with a fierce smile and delivered a scathing indictment of predatory business practices that made headlines across the Pacific Northwest. That evening, I stood in my office looking out at the Portland skyline, watching the sun set over the city where I'd lost everything and found my strength. My phone had been ringing all day with calls from potential clients who wanted to work with the company that had exposed corporate corruption and fought back against predatory practices. Pat knocked on my doorframe. "Busy day?" "The best kind of busy," I replied. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected." "You know, Maya, when I agreed to let you handle this investigation, I thought I was indulging a young woman's need for revenge. I didn't realize I was unleashing one of the most effective corporate warriors I've ever seen." I turned from the window to face her. "I learned from the best. What you did went far beyond protecting our company. You saved dozens of other small businesses from being targeted by Manning's operation. The FBI says they've identified at least 20 other companies that were infiltrated using similar methods." The weight of that accomplishment settled over me. This hadn't just been about my personal betrayal or my company's survival. It had been about protecting an entire community of entrepreneurs and innovators from predators who would have destroyed them for profit. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day. It was from Ryan, sent from jail. "Maya, please, I need to talk to you. I can explain everything." I deleted the message without reading it twice. There was nothing Ryan Thompson could say that I needed to hear. He'd made his choices, and now he would live with the consequences. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, ready to go home to my apartment and my life. A life that was finally, completely my own again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new possibilities I couldn't have imagined when I was crying in the rain outside that gas station 4 months ago. As the elevator descended, I thought about the woman I'd been then, heartbroken, confused, desperate for answers that seemed impossible to find. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to those who would underestimate her. Maya Chen, silent partner and co-founder of Evergreen Digital Solutions, was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks after Ryan's arrest, I was sitting in the gleaming conference room of Patterson and Associates, one of Portland's most prestigious law firms. Across from me sat Margaret Patterson herself, a woman whose legal reputation preceded her like thunder before lightning. She was reviewing the civil lawsuit we were preparing against Manning Enterprises, her silver pen making precise notations in the margins of each page. "Maya, this is the most comprehensive corporate malfeasance case I've handled in 30 years of practice," she said, looking up from the documents with something approaching admiration. "The evidence you've compiled doesn't just prove theft. It demonstrates a systematic criminal enterprise designed to destroy competitors through fraud and espionage." I nodded, though my mind was already moving beyond the legal proceedings to what came next. The criminal charges would ensure Ryan and Richard Manning faced justice, but I wanted something more than prison sentences. I wanted to make sure they could never rebuild what they'd lost, never again prey on small businesses and entrepreneurs who'd worked honestly to build something meaningful. "What are we looking at in terms of damages?" I asked. Margaret flipped through several pages of financial projections. "Conservative estimate? $15 million in actual damages, another $30 million in punitive damages. But honestly, Maya, I think we could ask for more. Manning Enterprises was positioning itself to acquire your company for pennies on the dollar after they'd destroyed your reputation and client base. The lost value from that attempted theft alone could push our damages claim north of $60 million. $60 million. The number should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like simple mathematics. They'd tried to steal my life's work, my company, my future. The money wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restitution and ensuring they understood the true cost of their choices. "There's something else," Margaret continued, her voice taking on a tone I couldn't quite identify. "I received a call this morning from the Justice Department. They want to discuss your potential testimony in a broader federal investigation into corporate espionage in the tech sector." I leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of investigation?" "Apparently your case has opened doors to other situations. The FBI has identified a pattern of venture capital firms using similar tactics across multiple states. They're building a racketeering case that could reshape how corporate espionage is prosecuted federally." She paused, studying my face. "They want you to be their star witness. The idea of testifying in federal court, of being the public face of a crusade against corporate corruption, felt both thrilling and terrifying. But more than that, it felt right. This had stopped being about my personal betrayal months ago. Now it was about protecting other entrepreneurs from the predators who would destroy them for profit. When do they need an answer? End of the week. "But Maya, you should know that taking this on will make you a target. There are powerful people who won't appreciate having their business practices exposed in federal court." I thought about that for a moment, weighing the risks against the potential impact. Then I remembered Jessica Manning crying in that coffee shop, finally understanding how she'd been manipulated by the men she trusted most. I thought about all the other small business owners who might be sitting in their offices right now, unaware that someone they trusted was systematically destroying them. "Set up the meeting," I said. "I'll testify." That afternoon, I was back at Evergreen's offices, reviewing quarterly projections with Pat and our newly expanded team. The publicity from the Manning case had brought us more clients than we could handle, and we were in the process of hiring 6 new employees to manage the growth. It was a good problem to have, but it meant long days and constant decision-making. Kim knocked on my office door around 4 p.m., her expression troubled. "Maya, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing resumes for our new senior strategist position. "Who is it?" Ashley Thompson. She says she's Ryan's sister. My blood chilled. I remembered Ashley from a handful of family gatherings during my relationship with Ryan, a quiet woman in her early 30s who worked as a teacher and always seemed slightly uncomfortable with her brother's aggressive ambition. I couldn't imagine what she wanted now, 3 weeks after Ryan's arrest had made headlines across Oregon. Send her in. Ashley Thompson looked older than I remembered, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes practical rather than fashionable. She moved with the careful dignity of someone carrying a heavy burden, and her eyes held the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleepless nights and difficult decisions. Maya, thank you for seeing me, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I know you have every reason to refuse. What can I do for you, Ashley? She took a deep breath as if gathering courage. I want to apologize for what my brother did to you. Not just the business stuff, though that was horrible, but the personal betrayal, the way he treated you, the way he disappeared from your life without explanation. It was cruel and inexcusable. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda, but found only genuine remorse. You're not responsible for Ryan's choices. Maybe not, but I'm responsible for mine. And I chose to stay silent when I should have spoken up. She shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. Maya, I knew something was wrong months before Ryan left you. He was getting mysterious phone calls, spending money he shouldn't have had, talking about business opportunities that didn't make sense for someone in his position. My pulse quickened. You knew he was working for Manning? I didn't know the details, but I knew he was lying about something. And when he started dating that blonde woman so quickly after breaking up with you, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Ashley's voice cracked slightly. I should have called you. I should have warned you. Instead, I told myself it wasn't my business and let my brother destroy your life. The weight of her confession settled between us. Ashley had possessed information that might have helped me months earlier, but she'd chosen family loyalty over doing what was right. It was a choice I could understand, even if I couldn't forgive it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because Ryan called me from jail yesterday. He's trying to get our family to mortgage our childhood home to pay for his legal defense. He wants our parents to liquidate their retirement savings to hire expensive lawyers who might get him a lighter sentence. She looked directly into my eyes. He still doesn't understand that what he did was wrong. He thinks he's the victim in all this. I wasn't surprised. Ryan had always possessed an almost pathological ability to reframe his failures as someone else's fault. In his mind, I was probably the villain for exposing his crimes rather than quietly accepting my destruction. What do you want from me, Ashley? Nothing, she said firmly. I don't want you to drop the charges or show mercy or any of that. Ryan made his choices, and he needs to face the consequences. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in his family supports what he did. And I wanted to give you this. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, which she placed on my desk. I found this in Ryan's old room at our parents' house when I was helping them clean out his things. I think you should have it. I opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a collection of photographs, pictures Ryan had taken of me over the course of our relationship. Some were candid shots of me working at my laptop, completely unaware I was being photographed. Others showed me at business dinners and networking events, my conversations and interactions captured without my knowledge or consent. But the most disturbing images were clearly taken in my apartment. My bathroom, my bedroom, my home office, intimate spaces where I'd believed I had privacy. At the bottom of the stack was a photograph of my laptop screen showing Evergreen's client database, obviously taken while I was out of the room. He was documenting everything, I said quietly, more to myself than to Ashley. There's more, she said reluctantly. Look at the back of the last photo. I flipped over the image of my laptop screen. In Ryan's handwriting were detailed notes about my daily routines, my work habits, even my emotional state on different days. Subject shows signs of stress regarding Morrison contract, increased vulnerability to emotional manipulation, recommend accelerating timeline. The clinical detachment of the language made my skin crawl. I hadn't been his girlfriend. I'd been his assignment, his target, his mark. Every intimate moment, every shared vulnerability, every expression of love had been theater performed for an audience of corporate criminals. Maya, Ashley said softly, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know the truth about who my brother really is. You didn't lose a good man who made bad choices. You escaped from someone who was never worthy of your love in the first place. After Ashley left, I sat alone in my office staring at the photographs spread across my desk. The violation was deeper than anything I'd experienced before. Not just the theft of business secrets, but the systematic documentation of my private life for criminal purposes. Ryan hadn't just betrayed my trust, he'd turned our entire relationship into a surveillance operation. I gathered the photos and locked them in my desk drawer, then called Margaret Patterson. Margaret, I have additional evidence for our civil case. Evidence that proves Ryan Thompson conducted systematic surveillance of my personal life for over a year. There was a pause. That changes things significantly, Maya. Invasion of privacy, potentially stalking charges, civil rights violations. We're looking at a completely different level of damages. Good. I want him to understand that destroying someone's life has consequences. That evening, I drove to my storage unit across town, a small space I'd rented months earlier to hold boxes of personal items I couldn't bear to keep in my apartment after Ryan's betrayal. I hadn't been back since the day I'd packed away our shared memories, but tonight I needed to verify something. The unit was exactly as I'd left it, cardboard boxes stacked neatly against one wall. I found the box labeled personal items and began searching through its contents. There, wrapped in tissue paper, was the ceramic vase Ryan had given me for my birthday last year. It was beautiful, handcrafted by a local artist, and I'd treasured it as a symbol of his thoughtfulness. Now, armed with the knowledge of who Ryan really was, I examined the vase more carefully. Running my fingers along its base, I found what I was looking for: a small, almost invisible bump in the ceramic. Using my car key, I carefully chipped away at the spot until something small and metallic fell into my palm. A listening device. Tiny, sophisticated, and undoubtedly expensive. Ryan hadn't just been photographing my life, he'd been recording it as well. I sat in my car outside the storage facility for 20 minutes, holding the device and processing the full scope of what had been done to me. Every private phone call, every conversation with Pat about business strategy, every moment I'd thought I was alone in my own home, had been monitored and transmitted to my enemies. The rage that filled me was clean and cold, like steel being forged in fire. This went beyond corporate espionage or even personal betrayal. This was a systematic violation of my humanity, an attempt to reduce me to nothing more than a source of valuable intelligence. I started my car and drove directly to the FBI field office downtown. Agent Rebecca Torres was still at her desk despite the late hour, and she looked up with surprise when I appeared in her doorway. "Ms. Chen, what can I do for you?" I placed the listening device on her desk. "I found this in a gift Ryan Thompson gave me over a year ago. I believe my Kletzai's apartment was under surveillance for the entire duration of our relationship." Agent Torres picked up the device with a pair of tweezers, examining it under her desk lamp. "This is military-grade equipment. Expensive, sophisticated, and definitely illegal for civilian use." "How illegal?" "Federal wiretapping charges, conspiracy, civil rights violations. If we can prove he placed this device, we're looking at an additional 10 to 15 years in prison." She looked up at me with something approaching awe. "Maya, do you have any idea how rare it is for victims to uncover this level of evidence? Most corporate espionage cases rely on financial records and digital communications. What you've provided is a complete documentation of a criminal conspiracy." I thought about that as I drove home through the empty Portland streets. I wasn't just rare, I was unprecedented. Most victims of corporate espionage never discovered what had been done to them, never fought back, never saw justice. They simply lost their businesses, their livelihoods, and their futures to predators who operated in shadows. But I had fought back. Not just survived, but thrived. Not just exposed the crime, but built a case so comprehensive that it would reshape how these cases were prosecuted. I had turned my destruction into a weapon that would protect others from suffering the same fate. The next morning brought a call that would change everything again. I was reviewing contract proposals when Kim announced that I had a call from Washington, D.C. "Ms. Chen, this is Deputy Assistant Attorney General Carolyn Walsh from the Justice Department's Criminal Division. I understand you've been cooperating with our investigation into corporate espionage in the technology sector. That's correct. I'm calling because we'd like to expand the scope of your involvement. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of similar operations in 12 states, involving at least 40 companies and hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen intellectual property. We believe you have the expertise and credibility to serve as a consultant on our task force, a federal task force. The opportunity to help dismantle an entire network of corporate criminals, to ensure that what happened to me could never happen to anyone else. It was everything I'd hoped for and more than I'd dared to imagine. What would that involve? Initially, reviewing case files and helping us identify patterns and evidence we might have missed. Eventually, testifying before Congress about the need for stronger federal protections for small businesses and entrepreneurs. She paused. Ms. Chen, you've become something of a legend in federal law enforcement circles. Your case is being used as a model for how victims can fight back against corporate crime. After I hung up, I sat quietly in my office contemplating how dramatically my life had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a heartbroken woman crying in the rain, convinced that my life was over. Now I was being asked to help reshape federal law enforcement priorities and protect entrepreneurs across the country. Pat knocked on my doorframe, her expression curious. Big news? The Justice Department wants me to join a federal task force investigating corporate espionage. She stepped into my office and closed the door behind her. Maya, that's incredible, but are you sure you're ready for that level of public attention? Once you become the face of this issue, there's no going back to anonymity. I considered her question seriously. Anonymity had been my protection for years. The silent partner who wielded power from the shadows, who could act without being seen. But anonymity had also been my limitation. How many other women were suffering in silence because they didn't know they could fight back? How many small businesses were being destroyed because the predators operated in darkness? I'm tired of hiding, I said finally. If I can prevent this from happening to other people, then the loss of privacy is worth it. That afternoon, I called Deputy Assistant Attorney General Walsh back and accepted her offer. Within hours, I received a FFK packet of confidential case files by encrypted email, dozens of companies across the country that had been targeted by operations similar to Manning's scheme. Reading through the files was like staring into a funhouse mirror of my own experience. The methods varied, but the pattern was consistent. Trusted employees recruited by competitors, personal relationships weaponized for corporate intelligence, small businesses destroyed by predators with unlimited resources and no scruples. But there was one case file that made me stop breathing entirely. Evergreen Digital Solutions wasn't Manning's first target in Portland. It was his second. 3 years earlier, a small web development firm called Cascade Creative had been driven out of business through nearly identical methods. The owner, a woman named Diana Alvarez, had lost everything when her business partner was recruited by Manning Enterprises to steal client lists and proprietary code. Diana Alvarez had fought back through the courts, but without the comprehensive evidence I'd been able to gather, her case had been dismissed. Manning had walked away unscathed, and Diana had been forced to declare bankruptcy. According to the file, she now worked as a freelance graphic designer, barely making ends meet. I found Diana's contact information in the file and called her immediately. Diana, this is Maya Chen from Evergreen Digital Solutions. I believe we have something important to discuss. We met that evening at a quiet restaurant in Southeast Portland. Diana was a woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the cautious manner of someone who'd been burned by trusting the wrong people. When I explained who I was and what had happened to my company, her expression shifted from wariness to amazement. You actually beat them, she said quietly. You actually made them pay. I had advantages you didn't have, I replied. Better documentation, more resources, and frankly, luck. But Diana, I think there's a way for you to get justice too. I explained about the federal task force and the expanding investigation into Manning's operations. Your case wasn't dismissed because you were wrong. It was dismissed because the prosecutors didn't understand the scope of what they were dealing with. Now they do. Diana stared at me across the table, tears forming in her eyes. Maya, it's been 3 years. I've rebuilt my life as much as I can. I'm not sure I have the strength to fight that battle again. You wouldn't be fighting alone, I assured her. The Justice Department is building a racketeering case that would include your situation as part of Manning's pattern of criminal activity. All you'd have to do is testify about what happened to you. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the possibility that her destroyed business and ruined reputation might finally be vindicated. If I do this, if I testify, will it really make a difference? Diana, your testimony could help send Richard Manning to federal prison for the rest of his life. It could also help recover some of the money you lost when he destroyed your company. I leaned forward, speaking with the conviction that had carried me through the darkest moments of my own fight. But more than that, it could prevent him from ever doing this to anyone else. By the time we parted ways that evening, Diana had agreed to cooperate with the federal investigation. As I drove home through the Portland night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began. Hope that extended beyond my own situation. The case against Manning Enterprises was no longer just about my betrayal or my company's survival. It had become a movement, a reckoning for an entire industry of predators who had operated with impunity for too long. And I was no longer just a victim seeking justice. I was a leader in a fight that would reshape how business was conducted across the country. The following week brought a flurry of activity as the federal investigation accelerated. I spent my days reviewing case files and my evenings on conference calls with prosecutors and agents from multiple states. The scope of Manning's operation was staggering. Over $200 million in stolen intellectual property, 43 companies targeted for acquisition through illegal means, and a network of corrupt employees and compromised executives that stretched across the entire Pacific Northwest. But the most satisfying development came on a Thursday afternoon when Agent Torres called with news that made my heart sing. Maya, we just executed search warrants on Manning Enterprises' financial records. You're not going to believe what we found. Try me. Richard Manning has been operating a systematic tax evasion scheme for over 5 years. Shell companies, offshore accounts, fraudulent deductions, the whole 9 yards. The IRS is estimating he owes over $30 million in back taxes and penalties. Tax evasion. The charge that had brought down Al Capone, now threatening to end Richard Manning's empire. Even if he somehow avoided the espionage charges, the tax case alone would destroy him financially and ensure he spent years in federal prison. There's more, Agent Torres continued. We've identified 12 other venture capital firms using similar tactics. This investigation is going to reshape the entire industry. That evening, I stood once again at my office window, looking out over the Portland skyline. But this time, I wasn't thinking about my own journey from victim to victor. I was thinking about all the entrepreneurs and innovators who would build their dreams in a world where predators like Manning faced real consequences for their crimes. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Chen, this is Jessica Manning. I wanted you to know that I've been accepted to graduate school for social work. I want to help people who've been victimized the way we were. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to choose justice over family loyalty. I smiled as I read the message. Jessica Manning, once the privileged daughter of a corporate criminal, was now planning a career helping victims rebuild their lives. It was a redemption I never could have predicted, but one that felt entirely right. Another message appeared on my phone, this one from Ashley Thompson. Maya, Ryan was sentenced today, 15 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. I thought you should know that justice was served. 15 years. Ryan Thompson would be in his mid-40s when he was released, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined, his life permanently altered by the choices he'd made. It was a sentence that reflected not just the crimes he'd committed, but the comprehensive nature of his betrayal. I thought about the woman I'd been when this journey started. Heartbroken, confused, desperate for answers that seemed impossible to find. That woman could never have imagined where this path would lead, could never have envisioned herself as a federal consultant reshaping corporate law enforcement. But that woman had possessed something precious that she hadn't recognized at the time. The strength to fight back when everything seemed lost, the intelligence to document and expose the truth, and the courage to demand justice, even when the odds seemed impossible. Maya Chen, silent partner and co-founder of Evergreen Digital Solutions, had become something more than she'd ever dreamed possible. Not just a successful entrepreneur, but a guardian, standing between honest businesses and the predators who would destroy them. And this was only the beginning. 6 months into my role as a federal consultant, I received a call that would test everything I'd learned about fighting corporate predators. I was in my hotel room in Chicago, preparing for testimony before a Senate subcommittee on business fraud, when Deputy Assistant Attorney General Walsh's name appeared on my phone screen. "Maya, we have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention. How quickly can you get to San Francisco?" The urgency in her voice told me this wasn't routine. "I can be there tonight. What's happening?" "We've intercepted communications," suggesting that a major technology acquisition is being orchestrated through stolen intellectual property. The target company is valued at over $800 million, and the acquisition is scheduled to close within 72 hours. $800 million. The scale dwarfed anything we'd encountered in the Manning investigation, but the pattern was familiar enough to make my stomach clench with recognition. Who's the target? A biotech startup called Nexus Therapeutics. They've developed a revolutionary cancer treatment protocol that could save millions of lives. The acquiring company is Meridian Capital, and their due diligence process has been suspiciously comprehensive for a hostile takeover. I was already pulling clothes from my suitcase, my mind racing through the implications. Biotech intellectual property was some of the most valuable and closely guarded information in the business world. If someone was stealing cancer research data, they weren't just committing corporate espionage, they were potentially delaying life-saving treatments for patients who couldn't afford to wait. What's my role? The CEO of Nexus Therapeutics is a woman named Dr. Rachel Kim. She's brilliant, but she's also isolated and under tremendous pressure. The acquisition is being positioned as a rescue operation. Nexus is supposedly facing bankruptcy due to cash flow problems. The setup sounded depressingly familiar. Manufacture a crisis. Position yourself as the savior. Acquire valuable assets for pennies on the dollar. It was Manning's playbook, scaled up to pharmaceutical levels. "Let me guess," I said. "The cash flow problems aren't real. Nexus's financial records show they should be profitable, but somehow their accounts receivable have been systematically delayed, their largest clients have suddenly developed payment issues, and their credit lines have been mysteriously called in early. Sabotage disguised as market forces. Someone had been systematically undermining Nexus Therapeutics' financial stability to force them into a vulnerable position. The sophistication of the operations suggested resources and connections far beyond what Manning had possessed. I caught the last flight to San Francisco that night, spending the journey reviewing files on Nexus Therapeutics and Dr. Rachel Kim. The company had been founded 5 years earlier by Dr. Kim and her research partner, Dr. James Morrison, both former oncologists at Stanford Medical Center. Their breakthrough treatment used genetic modification to enhance the body's natural immune response to cancer cells, showing unprecedented success rates in clinical trials. Dr. Rachel Kim's background was impressive. Harvard Medical School, fellowship at Johns Hopkins, published researcher with over 30 patents to her name. But the recent photos in her file showed a woman under siege, her professional confidence replaced by the haunted expression of someone fighting battles on multiple fronts. The Meridian Capital file was more troubling. The company had appeared seemingly overnight 18 months ago, backed by anonymous investors and specializing in distressed asset acquisition. Their previous purchases had all followed the same pattern, promising companies facing sudden financial crises, acquired at substantial discounts, then stripped of their valuable assets and dissolved. I landed in San Francisco at midnight and was at the FBI field office by 8 a.m. the next morning. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, met me in a secure conference room overlooking the bay. "Miss Chen, thank you for getting here so quickly. The situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated." She handed me a tablet displaying intercepted email communications. The messages were encrypted, but the FBI's cybercrime unit had broken the encryption using techniques developed during the Manning investigation. The emails revealed a coordinated attack on Nexus Therapeutics that had been planned for over a year. Dr. James Morrison, Rachel's research partner and supposed best friend, had been recruited by Meridian Capital and was systematically feeding them confidential information about the company's research, financial status, and strategic plans. But the betrayal went deeper than corporate espionage. Morrison had been documenting Dr. Kim's personal life, her relationships, her vulnerabilities, creating a psychological profile that Meridian was using to manipulate her decision-making. They knew about her mother's battle with breast cancer, her guilt over spending time on research instead of patient care, her financial obligations to the families who had invested their savings in Nexus. "This is psychological warfare," I said, studying the files. "They're not just stealing her research. They're breaking her down mentally to force her into surrendering her life's work." Agent Chen nodded grimly. "It gets worse. We have evidence that Morrison has been sabotaging clinical trials by providing incorrect data to regulatory agencies. Patients who could have been saved by Dr. Kim's treatment have been denied access because of his interference." The weight of that revelation settled over me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or business competition anymore. People were dying because of Morrison's betrayal. Cancer patients who could have lived if not for his greed and Meridian's ruthless ambition. "Where is Dr. Kim now?" "Meridian has her at a private retreat center in Napa Valley, supposedly for final negotiations. But our surveillance suggests it's more like a sophisticated form of imprisonment. She's isolated from her support system, surrounded by Meridian's people, and under constant psychological pressure to sign the acquisition agreement." I thought about my own experience with Ryan's manipulation, how effectively he'd isolated me from potential allies and made me doubt my own perceptions. The techniques Meridian was using were more sophisticated, but the underlying strategy was identical: break down the target's resistance through isolation, manipulation, and manufactured crises. "How long before she signs?" "Our intelligence suggests the ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow evening. Once she signs, Meridian will have legal control of all Nexus's intellectual property, including the cancer treatment protocol. 24 hours to stop a theft that could cost millions of lives and hundreds of millions of dollars." The timeline was impossibly tight, but the stakes were too high to accept failure. "I need to talk to her," I said. "Tonight." Agent Chen looked skeptical. "The retreat center is private property with extensive security. Meridian has made sure she can't be reached by phone or email. How do you propose to make contact?" I thought about that for a moment, then smiled. "The same way I exposed Ryan Thompson. With patience, planning, and a willingness to take risks that my enemies won't expect." That afternoon, I drove north toward Napa Valley in a rented car, my mind churning through possible approaches. The retreat center was located on a private estate surrounded by vineyards, accessible only through a guarded gate and monitored by extensive surveillance systems. A direct approach would be impossible, but corporate predators had a weakness I'd learned to exploit: their arrogance made them predictable. I parked outside a small cafe in downtown Napa and called Marcus Reed in Portland. "Marcus, I need your help with a surveillance operation. How quickly can you get to California? I can be there by tonight." "What are we dealing with?" I briefed him on the situation, focusing on the security arrangements at the retreat center and the psychological manipulation being used against Dr. Kim. "I need eyes on the location and a way to communicate with the target without alerting her handlers." "Understood. Maya, this sounds more dangerous than the Manning case. These people are operating at a completely different level, which is exactly why we can't let them win." Marcus arrived that evening with equipment I didn't recognize, high-tech surveillance gear that looked like something from a spy movie. We drove to a hillside overlooking the retreat center and set up observation positions behind a cluckly screen of oak trees. Through high-powered optics, I could see Dr. Rachel Kim walking through the estate's gardens, always accompanied by at least 2 people in business attire, who maintained careful distances while clearly monitoring her movements. She looked smaller than in her professional photos, her shoulders rounded with fatigue and stress. "Target is under constant supervision," Marcus observed through his own scope. 2 handlers minimum at all times, rotating every 4 hours. They're professionals. I watched Dr. Kim's body language, noting the way she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who knew she was being watched. But there was something else in her posture, a tension that suggested she was planning something, measuring distances and timing in a way that reminded me of my own preparations during the Manning investigation. "She knows," I said suddenly. "She knows what's happening to her." Marcus looked through his scope again. What makes you say that? Watch how she walks. She's not just being escorted. She's mapping the grounds, timing the guard rotations, looking for opportunities. Dr. Rachel Kim isn't a broken victim waiting for rescue. She's a fighter planning her own escape. The realization changed everything. Instead of trying to extract a helpless victim, I needed to contact a potential ally who was already working to save herself. The question was how to make contact without alerting her captors or compromising her own plans. The answer came to me as I watched Dr. Kim pause beside a small garden fountain, apparently admiring the landscaping while one of her handlers checked his phone. She was using the sound of the water to mask her movements, creating brief moments when she couldn't be overheard. Marcus, do you still have those microtransmitters you used for the Morrison surveillance? He pulled a small device from his equipment bag. Audio only, but they're virtually undetectable and have a range of about 50 yards. I need to get one to Dr. Kim without her handlers knowing about it. The opportunity came the next morning when Dr. Kim was escorted to the estate spa for what appeared to be a relaxation session designed to lower her psychological defenses before the final negotiation. I'd spent the night studying the grounds through thermal imaging and had identified a service entrance used by maintenance staff. Disguised in the uniform of a spa employee, complete with identification I'd acquired through methods I didn't examine too closely, I entered the facility through the service area and positioned myself in the massage therapy preparation room. When Dr. Kim arrived for her appointment, I was waiting with warmed towels and a professional demeanor that didn't trigger any suspicion from her escorts. Dr. Kim, I'll be preparing your treatment room today, I said in the neutral tone of a service professional. Please make yourself comfortable while I arrange the aromatherapy elements. As I draped a towel over her shoulders, I whispered quickly, My name is Maya Chen. I'm working with the FBI to stop Meridian's acquisition. The towel pocket contains a communication device. Use it when you're alone. Dr. Kim's body tensed for just a moment, then relaxed. She nodded almost imperceptibly and said in a normal voice, Thank you, that sounds wonderful. I finished the preparation and left through the service entrance, my heart pounding with the knowledge that Dr. Kim now had a lifeline to the outside world. But more importantly, she had confirmation that someone understood what was being done to her and was working to stop it. 3 hours later, the microtransmitter activated. Dr. Kim's voice came through clearly, speaking in low tones from what sounded like a bathroom with running water to mask the conversation. Maya Chen, I don't know who you are, but thank you for confirming what I suspected. James Morrison has been betraying our research for months, and Meridian has been systematically destroying my company's financial stability. I activated my own transmitter. Dr. Kim, we have evidence of a coordinated conspiracy involving corporate espionage, financial manipulation, and interference with clinical trials. We can stop them, but we need your help. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow evening's signing ceremony, can you delay it? I've been stalling for weeks, but they're applying serious pressure. They've threatened to destroy my research entirely if I don't cooperate, and they've made it clear that my family's safety depends on my compliance. The mention of threats against her family made my blood run cold. Meridian wasn't just stealing intellectual property. They were using intimidation and potential violence to coerce cooperation. This had escalated far beyond white-collar crime. Dr. Kim, we're going to get you out of there tonight. Can you be ready to move quickly if necessary? Yes, but Maya, there's something else you need to know. The cancer treatment protocol isn't just valuable research. It's ready for immediate clinical application. Patients are dying while Meridian delays the approval process to maximize their acquisition advantage. The moral weight of the situation crystallized in that moment. This wasn't just about protecting one company or one scientist from corporate predators. It was about ensuring that life-saving medical treatment reached patients who desperately needed it, people whose survival depended on stopping Meridian's theft. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen, I promised. Stay strong, Dr. Kim. Help is coming. That evening, I coordinated with Agent Chen and a tactical team for an operation that felt more like a military rescue than a business investigation. The plan was complex but necessary. Simultaneous raids on the retreat center, Meridian Capital's offices, and Dr. Morrison's residence, all timed to prevent the destruction of evidence or harm to Dr. Kim. At exactly 9 p.m., federal agents surrounded the Napa Retreat Center while I waited in a command vehicle monitoring communications. The operation unfolded with precision. Drive. Kim was extracted safely, her handlers were arrested without incident, and boxes of documents were seized from Meridian's on-site offices. But the most satisfying moment came when Agent Chen called from Meridian Capital's headquarters in San Francisco. "Maya, you need to hear this. We found recordings of conversations between Meridian's executives discussing their plan to delay Dr. Kim's cancer treatment until after the acquisition. They were literally planning to let patients die to improve their negotiating position. The recordings would provide irrefutable evidence of criminal conspiracy, but more importantly, they would ensure that everyone involved faced justice for their role in endangering innocent lives." Dr. Rachel Kim and I met face-to-face for the first time in the FBI field office the next morning. She was smaller than I'd expected, but carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who'd survived a battle that would have broken most people. "Maya, I can't thank you enough for what you've done," she said, shaking my hand with surprising firmness. "But I have to ask, how did you know what to look for? How did you understand their tactics so clearly?" I told her about Ryan Thompson, about Manning Enterprises, about my own journey, from victim to federal consultant. As I spoke, I watched recognition and understanding dawn in her eyes. "You've been through this yourself," she said quietly. "That's why you knew how to fight back." Experience is a harsh teacher, but it's an effective one. The important thing is that we stopped them before they could destroy your life's work. Dr. Kim was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had happened. Then she looked at me with an expression of determination I recognized from my own mirror during the darkest days of my fight against Manning. "Maya, I want to help. Other companies, other researchers, they're facing the same threats we encountered. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." 3 days later, Dr. Rachel Kim testified before the same Senate subcommittee where I'd been scheduled to appear, describing how Meridian Capital had attempted to steal cancer research that could save millions of lives. Her testimony, combined with the evidence we'd gathered, led to the passage of the strongest corporate espionage legislation in American history. But perhaps more importantly, it established a precedent that would protect medical researchers and biotech companies from the kind of predatory tactics that had nearly destroyed Nexus Therapeutics. James Morrison was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy, corporate espionage, and interference with medical research. Meridian Capital's executives received similar sentences, and the company was dissolved with its assets distributed to the victims of their various schemes. The cancer treatment protocol that Dr. Kim had developed was fast-tracked through the regulatory process and began saving lives within months of the arrests. Every patient who survived because of that treatment was a victory that went far beyond legal proceedings or financial settlements. Standing in my office in Portland 6 weeks later, I reflected on how the Nexus case had changed my understanding of what was possible when victims fought back against corporate predators. We hadn't just stopped a theft, we'd saved a medical breakthrough that would benefit humanity for generations to come. My phone rang with a call from Deputy Assistant Attorney General Walsh. "Maya, congratulations on the Nexus investigation. Your work probably saved more lives than we'll ever be able to count." "Thank you, but it was Dr. Kim's courage that made the difference. I just helped her find a way to fight back." Which brings me to why I'm calling. We've identified 3 more situations similar to Nexus: biotechnology companies facing coordinated attacks designed to force them into disadvantageous acquisitions. How would you feel about leading a specialized task force focused specifically on protecting medical research from corporate espionage? A specialized task force dedicated to protecting medical research. The opportunity to ensure that life-saving discoveries reached patients instead of being stolen by predators who would delay their availability for profit. It was more than I could have hoped for when I first decided to fight back against Ryan Thompson's betrayal. "I'm interested," I said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." Dr. Rachel Kim joins the task force as a scientific advisor. We also need the authority to pursue cases proactively, instead of waiting for victims to come forward. And I want protection for whistleblowers who risk their careers to expose these schemes. Done, done, and done. Maya, you've earned the right to set the terms for how we fight this battle. After I hung up, I walked to my office window and looked out over the Portland skyline. The city looked the same as it had 8 months ago when I was crying in the rain outside that gas station. But everything else had changed completely. Maya Chen, heartbroken ex-girlfriend, had become Maya Chen, leader of a federal task force protecting medical research from corporate predators. The woman who had once been isolated and manipulated by the man she loved was now working to ensure that other victims had the resources and support needed to fight back. But more than that, I discovered a purpose that went far beyond personal vindication or financial success. Every case we solved, every corporate criminal we stopped, every breakthrough treatment we protected, had the potential to save lives and advance human knowledge. Ryan Thompson had tried to destroy me to benefit his corporate masters. Instead, he'd forged me into a weapon that would protect countless others from suffering the same fate. The irony was perfect, but the justice was even better. That evening, I received a text message from Dr. Rachel Kim. Maya, our first patient started the cancer treatment protocol today. The early results are even better than we hoped. Thank you for making sure this moment was possible. I saved the message and smiled. Ryan Thompson was serving 15 years in federal prison, isolated from the outside world and forgotten by the corporate predators who had used him. Meanwhile, cancer patients were being cured by treatments that existed because we'd stopped those same predators from stealing them. Sometimes justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about transformation. Ryan had transformed me from a victim into a protector. Now I would spend the rest of my career transforming victims into fighters, ensuring that corporate predators faced opponents who were smarter, stronger, and more determined than they could possibly imagine. The silent partner had found her voice, and she was just getting started. 2 years after the Nexus Therapeutics case, I was standing in the marble lobby of the federal building in Washington, D.C., adjusting my navy blazer before what would become the most important testimony of my career. The Senate Judiciary Committee was voting on the Corporate Espionage Accountability Act, legislation that would fundamentally reshape how America prosecuted white-collar crime in the digital age. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was here because Ryan Thompson had tried to destroy my life. If he hadn't ghosted me, if he hadn't stolen my company's secrets, if he hadn't turned our relationship into a surveillance operation for his corporate masters, I would still be Maya Chen, silent partner of a small Portland marketing firm. Instead, I'd become Maya Chen, the federal consultant whose cases had led to over 300 arrests and recovered nearly $2 billion in stolen intellectual property. Senator Patricia Hawkins, the committee chair, approached me in the lobby with her characteristic no-nonsense stride. Ms. Chen, are you ready for this? The opposition has some heavyweight lobbyists testifying against the bill today. I smiled, thinking about the scared woman who'd once sat in the rain outside a gas station, convinced her life was over. Senator, I've been ready for this fight since the day I discovered that the man I loved was being paid to destroy me. The hearing room was packed beyond capacity, with spectators lining the walls and overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent chambers. The Corporate Espionage Accountability Act represented the most significant reform of business crime prosecution in decades, and the corporate lobbying machine had mobilized every resource to defeat it. As I took my seat at the witness table, I scanned the audience and felt a surge of pride at the faces looking back at me. Dr. Rachel Kim sat in the front row, now serving as my deputy on the Medical Research Protection Task Force. Diana Alvarez, the Portland entrepreneur whose business had been destroyed by Manning Enterprises years before my own case, had become a victim advocate, helping other small business owners navigate the aftermath of corporate espionage. But it was the face in the back corner that made me pause. Ashley Thompson, Ryan's sister, sat quietly with a notebook in her lap. She'd completed her master's degree in social work the previous year and now counseled family members of white-collar criminals, helping them process the trauma of discovering that someone they loved had lived a secret life of crime. The committee chair called the hearing to order, and I was sworn in along with the other witnesses. To my left sat representatives from 3 major corporations opposing the legislation, their arguments predictably focused on the burden of compliance and the potential for frivolous prosecutions. To my right was Dr. Kim and Professor Alan Hendricks, a cybersecurity expert from MIT, who'd helped develop the digital forensics techniques we use to trace stolen intellectual property. Senator Hawkins began with the opening question I'd been anticipating for weeks. Ms. Chen, you've become something of a legend in federal law enforcement circles. Can you explain to this committee how a marketing executive from Portland became the nation's leading expert on corporate espionage? I looked directly into the cameras broadcasting the hearing live across the country, thinking about all the victims who were watching, hoping for justice that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Senator, I became an expert because I was a victim. 3 years ago, the man I planned to marry was secretly working for a competitor who wanted to acquire my company through theft rather than honest competition. He systematically stole our proprietary strategies, documented my personal life for blackmail purposes, and disappeared from my life the moment his employers no longer needed intelligence from our relationship. The room was completely silent, every person hanging on my words. Even the corporate representatives had stopped shuffling their papers. But I discovered something important during that experience, something that changed not just my life but my understanding of how these crimes affect entire communities. Corporate espionage isn't just about stealing secrets or gaining competitive advantages. It's about predators who systematically destroy the dreams and livelihoods of honest entrepreneurs because it's easier than competing fairly. I pulled out a tablet and referenced the notes I'd prepared. Since joining the federal task force, I've investigated over 40 cases of corporate espionage. In every single case, the pattern was identical. Trusted employees recruited by competitors, personal relationships weaponized for intelligence gathering, and small businesses destroyed by predators with unlimited resources and no ethical boundaries. Senator William Drake, the ranking minority member and a vocal opponent of the legislation, leaned forward with the aggressive posture I'd expected. Ms. Chen, while your personal story is certainly compelling, isn't it true that most corporate espionage allegations are actually just business disputes between competitors? How can this committee be certain that increased federal prosecution won't simply criminalize normal competitive behavior? The question was designed to undermine my credibility by suggesting I was motivated by personal vendetta rather than objective analysis. I'd been preparing for this attack for months. Senator Drake, let me share some specific data that addresses your concern. I activated the presentation system and displayed a chart showing conviction rates in corporate espionage cases. In the 42 cases I've personally investigated, we achieved convictions in 41. The average sentence was 12 years in federal prison. The average amount of stolen intellectual property was $87 million per case. The numbers spoke for themselves, but I wasn't finished. More importantly, Senator, these weren't disputes between competitors. They were systematic criminal enterprises designed to steal innovation rather than create it. Let me give you a specific example. I clicked to the next slide, showing before and after photos of a small biotech laboratory in Seattle. GenePath Laboratories was founded by Dr. Sarah Martinez, a former CDC researcher who developed a revolutionary diagnostic test for early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The test could have been available to patients within 6 months of her company securing FDA approval. The photos showed a thriving research facility transformed into an empty shell, with 4 lease signs visible through the windows. Dr. Martinez's business partner, recruited by Olympus Pharmaceuticals, systematically stole her research data and provided it to his handlers. Olympus then used that stolen research to develop their own diagnostic test, which they rushed to market while simultaneously filing frivolous patent challenges that delayed Dr. Martinez's approval process. I could see the committee members taking notes, their expressions growing more serious, as they processed the implications. Dr. Martinez lost everything: her company, her research, her life savings invested in developing a treatment that could help millions of people. Olympus Pharmaceuticals, meanwhile, made over $400 million selling a diagnostic test they stole rather than developed. Patients who could have been diagnosed and treated months earlier suffered and died because of this theft. Senator Drake looked uncomfortable but pressed forward. Even accepting your characterization of that case, Ms. Chen, how does increased federal prosecution prevent such situations? Won't enhanced penalties simply drive this behavior underground rather than eliminate it? The question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how corporate crime operated, and I was prepared to educate him. Senator, corporate espionage succeeds because it's systematic, well-funded, and historically faced minimal consequences. The average sentence for stealing $80 million in intellectual property has been less than 3 years in minimum security facilities. The average recovery for victims has been less than 10% of their losses. I advanced to the next slide, showing a comparison chart that made the disparity obvious. By contrast, someone who robs a bank of $50,000 faces an average sentence of 8 years in federal prison. We've created a system where stealing intellectual property worth millions is treated less seriously than stealing cash worth thousands. The committee rooms stirred as members processed the stark comparison. Even Senator Drake seemed taken aback by the numbers. The Corporate Espionage Accountability Act doesn't just increase penalties, I continued. It provides resources for victims to fight back, establishes specialized courts to handle these complex cases, and creates a victim compensation fund to help entrepreneurs rebuild what was stolen from them. Senator Hawkins nodded approvingly. Ms. Chen, can you speak to the economic impact of corporate espionage on American innovation? This was the heart of my argument, the reason why this legislation mattered beyond individual cases of injustice. Senator, the International Trade Commission estimates that American companies lose over $300 billion annually to intellectual property theft. But that number only reflects direct financial losses. It doesn't account for the innovations that never reach market because the innovators were destroyed before they could complete their work. I thought about Dr. Martinez and her Alzheimer's diagnostic test, about the cancer patients who'd nearly been denied treatment because of the Nexus Therapeutics theft, about all the entrepreneurs whose dreams had been stolen by predators who found theft easier than innovation. Every stolen breakthrough represents not just lost profits, but lost progress for humanity. When corporate espionage succeeds, we all lose. Patients who don't receive life-saving treatments, consumers who don't benefit from innovative products, and honest businesses that can't compete against competitors willing to cheat. Dr. Rachel Kim was called to testify next, and her presentation was devastating in its clinical precision. She described how Meridian Capital's attempted theft of cancer research had delayed treatments that could have saved hundreds of lives, turning abstract discussions of intellectual property into stark calculations of human cost. Committee members, Dr. Kim concluded, when corporate espionage targets medical research, it's not just theft, it's a crime against every patient who could benefit from that research. The Corporate Espionage Accountability Act isn't just about protecting businesses, it's about protecting the pace of medical progress itself. The corporate representatives who testified after us seemed woefully unprepared for the emotional and moral weight of our presentations. Their arguments about regulatory burden and compliance costs sounded hollow after hearing about cancer patients denied treatment and Alzheimer's families deprived of early diagnoses. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Senator Drake, clearly rattled by what he'd heard, asked a question that revealed how profoundly the hearing had affected him. Ms. Chen, Dr. Kim, I've been in Congress for 20 years, and I pride myself on understanding complex business issues. But I'll admit that I never fully grasped the human cost of what you're describing. If this legislation had been in place 3 years ago, would it have prevented what happened to your companies? I exchanged glances with Dr. Kim, both of us recognizing the significance of the question. Senator Drake wasn't just asking about policy anymore. He was asking about justice. Senator, I replied carefully, the legislation wouldn't have prevented Ryan Thompson from initially betraying my trust, or Dr. Morrison from stealing Dr. Kim's research. But it would have provided us with resources to fight back more quickly and effectively. More importantly, it would have ensured that the criminal penalties matched the severity of the crimes. Dr. Kim leaned forward to add her perspective. Senator Drake, under current law, the people who tried to steal my cancer research faced lighter sentences than someone convicted of car theft. The Corporate Espionage Accountability Act sends a clear message that America values innovation and protects innovators. The hearing continued for another 3 hours. with committee members asking increasingly detailed questions about implementation, enforcement, and potential unintended consequences. But I could see in their faces that the fundamental debate was over. The question was no longer whether to pass the legislation, but how to make it as effective as possible. During a brief recess, Ashley Thompson approached me in the hallway outside the hearing room. She looked older than when I'd last seen her, but there was a strength in her bearing that hadn't been there during the darkest days of her brother's trial. "Maya, I wanted to thank you for what you're doing here today. Not just for the victims you're helping, but for the families like mine who are trying to understand how someone we loved could have caused so much harm." I studied her face, seeing traces of the brother who'd betrayed me, but also recognizing the woman who'd chosen truth over family loyalty when it mattered most. "Ashley, you don't need to thank me. You chose to do the right thing when it was hardest." "I've been counseling other families dealing with white-collar crime," she said. "Spouses who discover their partners were living double lives, children who learn their parents built their wealth through theft, siblings who realize they never really knew someone they loved. The secondary trauma is real, and it's devastating." She pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "If this legislation passes, there will be more prosecutions, more families discovering terrible truths about people they trusted. I want to make sure they have support when their worlds collapse." The gesture reminded me of how justice wasn't just about punishing criminals. It was about healing the communities they damaged and preventing future victims from suffering in isolation. When the hearing resumed, Senator Hawkins announced that the committee would vote on the legislation the following week. But first, she wanted to address something that had emerged during the testimony. "Ms. Chen, Dr. Kim, your cases have clearly demonstrated the need for this legislation. But I'm curious about something else. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs and innovators who might be facing these threats right now, who might not realize they're being targeted until it's too late?" The question was precisely what I'd hoped someone would ask, because it gave me the opportunity to speak directly to potential victims who might be watching the hearing. "Senator, the most important thing to understand is that corporate espionage often begins with personal relationships. Trusted employees, romantic partners, business associates, anyone with access to confidential information can be recruited by competitors seeking an advantage." I thought about Ryan's manipulation, about how he'd used my emotions and trust to gain access to everything I'd worked to build. If someone in your business is asking unusual questions about strategies, finances, or client relationships, pay attention to that instinct. If a romantic partner seems unusually interested in your work, or if trusted employees are accessing files outside their normal responsibilities, those are warning signs. Dr. Kim added her own perspective. "In the medical research field specifically, we've learned to be especially cautious about collaborations that seem too good to be true. If a potential partner offers resources or access that seems disproportionate to what they're requesting in return, that's often a red flag." Senator Hawkins nodded thoughtfully. "And what should someone do if they suspect they're being targeted?" "Document everything," I said immediately. "Financial records, email communications, access logs, anything that shows unusual patterns or unauthorized information sharing. Most importantly, don't confront the suspected perpetrator directly. That often leads to destruction of evidence or acceleration of the theft." I pulled out my phone and displayed a number on the screen. The Corporate Espionage Task Force has established a confidential hotline for potential victims. We can provide guidance on evidence preservation and connect people with resources to protect their intellectual property. The number flashed on the hearing room's display screens and was immediately picked up by news cameras. Within minutes, I knew it would be broadcast across the country, reaching entrepreneurs and innovators who might desperately need the support but didn't know it existed. As the hearing concluded, I felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with legislative victories or career achievements. 3 years ago, I'd been a heartbroken woman sitting in the rain, convinced that my life was over because someone I trusted had destroyed everything I'd built. Today, I was helping to reshape federal law to ensure that other victims had the tools and support needed to fight back. The committee vote the following week was unanimous, 12-0 in favor of the Corporate Espionage Accountability Act. The full Senate passed it 3 weeks later by a margin of 78-22, and the House followed with an equally decisive vote. President Morrison signed it into law in a ceremony attended by dozens of victims whose cases had contributed to the legislation's development. But But for me, the most meaningful moment came 2 months later when I received a call from a young entrepreneur in Austin, whose business partner had been recruited by a competitor to steal their artificial intelligence algorithms. She'd seen my testimony on YouTube and called the task force hotline for help. "Ms. Chen," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination, "I think I'm in the same situation you were in 3 years ago. But I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to fight back." We worked with her for 6 weeks, helping her document the theft and gather evidence while she continued to act normally around her treacherous partner. When federal agents finally executed search warrants, they found evidence of the most sophisticated corporate espionage operation we'd encountered. A network of recruited insiders feeding stolen algorithms to a foreign technology consortium. The case resulted in 14 arrests and the recovery of over $600 million in stolen intellectual property. More importantly, it prevented advanced AI technology from being stolen and weaponized by hostile foreign powers. Standing in my office in Portland a year later, I looked out at the city skyline and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Evergreen Digital Solutions had grown into one of the most successful marketing firms on the West Coast, but my real work was leading the federal task force that had investigated over 200 cases and achieved a conviction rate approaching 98%. The phone on my desk rang with a call I'd been expecting. Margaret Patterson, the attorney who'd handled my civil lawsuit against Manning Enterprises, was calling with news about the final financial settlement. "Maya, the last of Manning's offshore accounts has been liquidated. After attorney fees and administrative costs, the total recovery is $63 million. Combined with the victim compensation fund established by the new legislation, we're able to provide full restitution to every business that was damaged by Manning's operation. $63 million. The number represented justice for dozens of entrepreneurs whose dreams had been stolen, but it also represented something more. Proof that fighting back against corporate predators wasn't just possible, it was profitable for the victims and devastating for the criminals." "There's something else," Margaret continued. "The Justice Department has asked me to establish a specialized law firm focused exclusively on corporate espionage cases. They want to ensure that future victims have access to legal representation that understands these complex crimes." The news didn't surprise me. The success of our cases had created demand for specialized expertise that didn't exist in the traditional legal market. "Are you going to do it?" "Only if you agree to serve as a consulting investigator. Maya, you've developed skills and instincts that can't be taught in law school. Victims need advocates who understand both the legal and emotional aspects of these crimes." I thought about that proposal as I walked home through the Pearl District that evening. The neighborhoods looked the same as they had 3 years ago, but everything else had fundamentally changed. I was no longer Maya Chen, the silent partner hiding in the shadows. I'd become Maya Chen, the federal consultant whose name struck fear into corporate criminals across the country. But more than that, I discovered a purpose that went far beyond personal vindication or professional success. Every case we solved, every criminal we stopped, every victim we helped represented a victory for honest innovation over predatory theft. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Rachel Kim. "Maya, our latest cancer treatment trial just achieved a 94% success rate. The research that Meridian tried to steal is now saving over 1,000 lives per month. Thank you for making sure this moment was possible." I saved the message and smiled. Ryan Thompson was serving the 8th year of his 15-year sentence in federal prison, his life reduced to a number in the Bureau of Prisons database. Meanwhile, cancer patients were being cured by treatments that existed because we'd stopped the theft that would have delayed their development. That evening, I received one final call that brought my journey full circle. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Hesitant, ashamed, but unmistakably Ryan Thompson calling from prison. "Maya, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something. I've had 3 years to think about what I did, and I finally understand the real damage I caused." I almost hung up, but something in his voice stopped me. This wasn't the manipulative man who'd stolen my secrets and broken my heart. This was someone who sounded genuinely broken by the weight of his own choices. "I'm listening," I said carefully. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too greedy and too stupid to appreciate what I had. But worse than that, I hurt people who were trying to help patients, people who were innovating and creating value for the world. I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand why it was wrong. The apology was 3 years too late, and came from a man who'd forfeited any claim to my forgiveness. But hearing it confirmed something I'd suspected, that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about forcing criminals to confront the true cost of their choices. Ryan, I said quietly, I hope you use the rest of your sentence to become someone better than the man who betrayed me. Not for my sake, but for your own. I hung up and deleted his number from my call history. Ryan Thompson was part of my past now, a chapter that had ended the moment he chose theft over honesty, betrayal over love. But the woman he tried to destroy had become something he never could have imagined, a guardian standing between honest innovators and the predators who would steal their dreams. Maya Chen, silent partner, had found her voice and used it to reshape an entire system of justice. The heartbroken woman crying in the rain had become the federal consultant whose cases protected billions of dollars in intellectual property and saved countless lives. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about destroying your enemies. They're about transforming their betrayal into a force that protects others from suffering the same fate. Ryan Thompson had tried to erase me from his success story. Instead, he'd written me into a legacy that would outlast us both. Standing at my apartment window that night, looking out over the Portland skyline where I'd built my new life, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Ryan's betrayal. Complete peace. Not the peace of forgiveness, but the peace of knowing that justice had been served and that the future was brighter because we'd fought for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.